Today on the NUFC Thursday Show, we're going to be looking at reports that Newcastle have made a bid for a Serie A winger, more interested in an AC Milan defender, links with a Premier League starlet, and a possible exit for a huge leader in the club. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to the NUFC Thursday Show, and before we start I want to thank everyone for making it possible for me to reach my goal of 500 subscribers before the season starts. I passed the milestone after the last video, really pleased with it, up to 516. Let's keep pushing, let's keep growing the channel, because once we do, more content can come. You know, a lot of people say in the comments that about ITK and that sort of thing. You'll not get that from me. I won't tell you anything that I don't already know. I do have some sort of sense about what's going on, but not a great deal in terms of you won't get the best news from me, but you'll get great analysis. Hopefully you'll get my opinions, and hopefully you value that. So authentic content, authentic Newcastle United opinion, analysis and news. So please do continue to like and share and subscribe if that's what you like. We'll get straight into it this week with a first story, which is Newcastle have been linked with making a bid for Fiorentina and Argentina winger Nicolas Gonzalez. He played at the Cellar Cup last year and impressed, caused Matt Targett a few issues down that left-hand side, showed that Newcastle needed to strengthen at left-back. That was my take. If you remember back to the very first video I did, that was one of the points I made in that video about how Newcastle were exposed in the Fiorentina game. That was down to Nicolas Gonzalez, and there's a lot of reasons why he would fit in at Newcastle. He's very experienced, great goal-scoring winger, 12 goals last season. I'll put the FBref stats on screen now, but in truth, I worry that he's not quite the right fit for Newcastle. He's very tall, not particularly stocky, not particularly physically built particularly well. He's 5'11", 72 kilos, which is about 11 stone. I don't think that would make him an obvious, easy step into the Premier League in terms of the physical adjustment from Serie A, the pace and all that sort of thing. That's an issue that I think has to be considered. But for me, the bigger problem is the fact that he isn't a player who creates much. He hasn't got much of a team ethic to his game. He's only 2 assists in Serie A last season, as well as 12 goals. The 68th percentile in terms of progressive passes. Those sort of stats do worry me a little bit. The team that Eddie Howe wants, he isn't particularly defensively strong as well. Intensity isn't part of his game. It doesn't really make much sense to me that Newcastle would go for someone like Gonzalez, even though he is clearly a talented player, got an eye for goal, that's quite evident, but did struggle this summer at the Copa America despite Argentina winning. He played 5 games, no goals, so he wasn't really particularly impressive this summer. Valuation around €35 million according to transfermarket.com, which would be about right for what Newcastle would get for him. I think that's probably about right. The link, though, doesn't talk about the price of the bid, but does mention that it is below the valuation, which is around that from Fiorentina by all accounts. So I think this is a deal that Newcastle should probably avoid. All in all, I think this is a good option, but when you compare him to other players who have more obvious output in terms of stats, I think Gonzalez is a player who isn't really the right fit for Newcastle. The way he plays doesn't really fit into what Eddie Howe wants. Intensity isn't part of his game, and ultimately, I'd be quite surprised if this was a bid that ultimately went through. Valuation wise, you are getting what you pay for, though I don't think he's overpriced at 35 million, and given the fact that we've spoken on this channel that Newcastle are prepared to go quite big for a winger, in that sense, for a player who scored 12 goals and pretty much 1 in 4 that he scored at Fiorentina, 1 in 3 when he was at Stuttgart as well. So he's got a pedigree of decent goal scoring at other major European leagues. Can he step up? In terms of that, the price is probably worth it. I don't believe his creative output is good enough, and I think for me there's other better options out there. I've mentioned them before. I think players like Noni Madueke, if you're looking at 35 million euros, around 35 million euros, 30 million pounds-ish price point, I think somebody like Noni Madueke who's younger, Gonzalez is 26, so he's at the end of the sort of resale value point. I think there is only a couple more years before he'll really start to stagnate defensively and creatively. He just doesn't have what Anthony Gordon brings on the other side. Eddie Howe wants his wingers to be proactive in both senses when it comes to goal contributions. Yes, Nicolas Gonzalez has got great scoring attributes, but assisting as well is an issue. And the fact that Gordon got 11 goals and 10 assists last season really is why I think he was the player of the season. I think Newcastle need a player who is, stats like that are very hard to expect from anyone, but you want somebody who's going to create and score goals. And I think Nicolas Gonzalez isn't the man for that. 26 years old, as I say, you can get better value and better age range than that, I think, as well. So this is a name that it'd be interesting to see if Newcastle have made this bid, but for me, I think Newcastle should and probably will look elsewhere. Next thing to talk about is Malick Thiaw, who we've spoken about. I won't go into his stats because I've already done a video which I've advertised so many times on this channel in the last few weeks, because he is continuously linked. He's probably the most linked man this summer so far. I'll put a link in the description below to the video that I did on him explaining why he'd be a perfect fit. But the reports are coming back that Newcastle having gone a little bit quiet on him because of the sort of Paul Mitchell bedding in period and the whole thing that's happened over the last couple of weeks with Newcastle. Lots of talk of reports in the Times from Martin Hardy that Newcastle are trying to tie up a €35 million deal. That's a good price point for him. I think he's shown improvement over 2 years at Milan from a €7 million move from Schalke, but he's not really established himself in that first team. And I think there's an opportunity to strike for a player who's tall, quick, good on the ball. Everything that Newcastle were looking for in Tosin Adarabioyo at a price point that isn't going to break the bank. As I say, Newcastle have got to look for 2 or 3 players at around €40 million this summer, and he's a really good example of a great option. I think there's lots of other things that we can talk about in terms of player sales. We'll get onto one in a minute that could boost the budget later in the window, but for now, if they've got around 100 million spending 3 key players to look at, then I think that for me, Malick Thiaw is a great deal that looks to be on the cards. Video down below in the description that proves why he's the right man for Newcastle, because he just fits that bill in terms of everything that Tosin Adarabioyo brought in terms of his game. But he's a lot younger. There's a lot more potential there, I think. So Newcastle are buying potential with Thiaw if they get him, but alongside the experience of Fabian Schär for the first few weeks and Dan Burn obviously in there as well, and the quality of Sven Botman when he returns, it could be a real game-changing defensive signing, because he is, as I say, a very good player who can allow teams to push up the pitch and not lose too much in terms of their defensive structure. So it was a really good signing if they can pull it off. The third major incoming story that I wanted to talk about, and again, I don't think this is going to happen because it's related to an outgoing, which is Oscar Bobb from Manchester City. Lots of reports in the Northwest suggesting that Manchester City are willing to offer Bob on loan and Rico Lewis on loan as a sweetener in the deal to sign Bruno Guimaraes for £80 million. As I mentioned, when Bruno's release clause expired, I wasn't exactly enamoured with the idea that Newcastle would guarantee to keep him, because other clubs might think that they can try a bid for lower, and this is a suggestion of that from Man City. I don't know how true this is, I don't know how likely this is, but Newcastle have been prepared to sell Bruno and know that they might have to sell Bruno at some point, but only on their terms. And the fact that they would lose £20 million on a player that they value at least £100 million for the sake of a very, very talented player in Oscar Bobb. We know that how good he is. He scored the winner against Newcastle at St James's Park last season, but he's not a player that's going to come in and change Newcastle's system, change the way Newcastle play, change the dynamic around the club. He's not going to be a game-changing signing for Newcastle. Developing another club's player is not the way that Newcastle will want to go. So I don't think this is something that Newcastle will look at in serious terms. But a very, very talented player. It's undeniable how good he is. The fact that Man City may offer a loan deal to try and prize one of Newcastle's key players away, I think with the way that Newcastle are trying to be more ruthless and go into a new era of acting more like a bigger club, if you like, that's something that just simply won't be acceptable for Newcastle. So that's not something that I think will get off the ground. Ben Dawson has vacated his position at Newcastle United's under-21 side as head coach. So he's joined Leicester City's first team structure under Steve Cooper, which means that Newcastle will now be looking for a new under-21 manager. It falls under the remit of the whole academy overhaul, which I think was likely under Paul Mitchell anyway. It's a good chance for a fresh start, but Ben Dawson's done some good work by all accounts. I think he's very highly rated, so it's a massive shame that he's gone, but Newcastle do have an opportunity to revamp their academy system, as I say, under Paul Mitchell. The only other thing to talk about is a link with Kieran Trippier in Saudi Arabia. This is not going away, and I think the fact that Newcastle went and got Tino Livramento last season, and the fact that Kieran Trippier has had a difficult season, still brilliant in terms of attacking output, 10 assists last season, still clearly a great leader at Newcastle, and there would be a fear that might be decimated with the fact that Wilson's also linked with an exit, and Matt Ritchie's gone, Paul Dummett's gone. There's some strong characters in the dressing room that have all left this summer, and Trippier, I don't think in an ideal world Newcastle would want to sell him, but the fact that he's continuously linked, and he's been linked in January with a move, and there's an opportunity to make a bit of money on a player that's obviously coming towards the end of his career, not quite as effective as he has been in the first 18 months at Newcastle, and the fact that they've got Tino Livramento, who for me is going to take that berth at the start of this season for right back. He's definitely going to be a more prominent figure this season, so Newcastle might look at that and think there's more readiness to sell Trippier. But as I say, I don't think the way that Eddie Howe's built this squad around the importance of leaders, I don't think he'd be particularly enamoured with the idea of selling Trippier, but it might be something that happens. As I've said multiple times on this channel, Newcastle want players who are only going to get better, and the fact that there's an opportunity here to cash in on Trippier might be too good to refuse. Thanks very much for joining me on this episode. Please like, share and subscribe, as I said. Really appreciate getting to 500 subscribers. Looking at live shows again, possibly next week for the first one, but I will be back on Saturday evening with a reaction video from the MKM Stadium where Newcastle will be playing Hull City in the pre-season friendly before they jet off to Japan. Thank you very much, and I'll see you then. Cheers.